No, I have to say, Roger, every time it is your turn to select a movie, you always impress and surprise me because you've gone for a movie released in 1989 in the US and 1990 in the rest of the world that has literally done the transition from the 80s to the 90s in terms of redefining what we mean by action hero and introduce, of course, the femme fatale genre. We are talking about Sea of Love, directed by Harold Becker, and let's watch the trailer together.
Don't you move! You drop it! Drop it! Drop it!
I heard from one of you guys you caught a good one. Face down taxpayer, back of the head in his own bed.
Your guy put an ad in the singles magazine, right?
There's some psycho woman out there killing guys.
Wanna know how we catch her? We put our own ad in. We set up dates with 30, 40, 50 of the ladies who answer. We take them out, some restaurant, some bar, get their prints on a wine glass. Bingo, she's dropped.
I don't believe in wasting time on this kind of stuff. You know what you know and you go with it.
You go with what?
I believe in animal attraction. I believe in love at first sight. I believe in this.
No offense, but you never did give her prints, did you?
She's not the shooter. I have done some desperate, foolish things.
You mean like being here with me? You're a good man.
You never know.
I always know.
What are you, nuts? You just met her.
What are you looking for? Huh?
She's a friggin' suspect, Frank. Just walk away.
This is getting out of hand.
What are you looking for? What are you looking for? What are you looking for?
Oh, Pacino. Pacino is just absolutely superb, isn't he? He's one of my favourite actors.
Can I just say that I miss the voice from those 90s and 80s trailer? The voice needs to come back because it was just part of the experience. You know, I mean, we're going to talk about the movie in a moment, but I just want to spend a moment on that trailer where talk about intrigue, talk about anticipation, but you have to have the voice.
Yeah, although it's funny, isn't it? Because a few weeks ago we talked about Empire Strikes Back, and I thought that Harrison Ford's voiceover for the trailer of Empire Strikes Back was way over the top. But I think in this instance it actually works better, and it adds to the excitement of the trailer, and genuinely makes you want to go and see the film.
When you mentioned that you selected Sea of Love and you'd begin the research exercise, I was literally projected back in time to France when we went to see it because Al Pacino was then, and it still is, a huge, huge name. I mean, if there was what would be coined in Al Pacino's movies, you went to see it. But my memory was twofold. The memory of the incredible relationship and chemistry between Al Pacino and John Goodman was just something that stayed with me. And the music, as well as I suppose, the landscape that is, the cityscape that is New York.
Yeah. I think it's a remarkable film from the point of view, as you say, the chemistry between the characters is incredible. As you say, Pacino and Goodman, it's almost as if they've been working together for decades. The chemistry between them, the way they bounce off each other, the way that their lines fit in, and the humour that they bring out of each other, and of course the relationship between Al Pacino and Ellen Barkin in the film, the lovers in the film eventually is remarkable too. But I think what I would add to what you said there about the music as well is that New York itself, the setting, New York itself, the city, is a character in this film. A lot of it's set at night. A lot of the film sort of reflects upon loneliness, the loneliness of the alcoholic cop, the loneliness of the single person, and when they're wandering the streets of a dark film noir New York with that sort of throbbing jazz music playing in the background, a bit of saxophone here, it's so vibrant and so melancholy. And it really does make the city, to me, part of the character. The city becomes one of the actors, if that doesn't sound too bizarre.
Not at all. And in fact, I am absolutely convinced that this was intentional because the director, Howard Becker, is from New York. And I'm absolutely convinced that he has spent time and time, again, walking down the streets, looking at the architecture. And I remember one of my kind of early filmmaking classes I went to, people saying, if you can't make a movie look great whilst in New York, you cannot be a filmmaker.
Yeah.
I think this because the lines and the way in which the streets are being literally kind of sandwiched by the tall buildings and the windows reflection and of course the nighttime with the reflections on the wet pavement. It's all there. And I think that to me is sometimes what's lacking in movies where they don't actually use the surroundings as part of the visual experience.
Yeah, and I think we should probably say that people might be getting the impression that this is what sort of film this is. This is a police procedural film, but it's a police procedural film with a twist. It's all about a series of murders. Al Pacino is the lead cop who's trying to find the murderer, and without giving the plot too much of the plot away, he ends up having a very erotic, not pornographic, but a very erotic relationship with one of the suspects, played by Ellen Barkin, who is a very, very, very striking sort of 80s femme fatale, isn't she? She's got the 80s hair, she's got the 80s shoulder pads, the way she dresses. It's a remarkable image. And there is a massive twist at the end, as you would expect. But the relationship again between Ellen Barkin and Al Pacino. I mean, let's face it, Al Pacino isn't your typical sort of superhero cop, is he? He's just a nondescript guy wearing a scruffy suit. He's not particularly muscly. He's not particularly chiseled. He's just an ordinary guy. And yet, the sort of chemistry between these two, you can genuinely believe that they're having this incredibly passionate affair with each other, and it really sucks you in. The acting was superb.
Oh, indeed. And, in terms of the threat through, what we understand and what is interesting about the character of Al Pacino, you're right, is flawed. He makes mistakes, actually gets it wrong, you could argue,
Yeah.
all the way till very end with a major twist and so on. He's taking risk, he's not listening to the standard device and so on. And it's all to do with him and his colleagues, from the NYPD, who are trying to track down this serial killer who's using the Lonely Hearts kind of page in the local newspaper to track down, and obviously kill individuals. And what you have, therefore, is this idea of there's an inquiry. There's people are trying to find a murderer, but everything is suggesting that this is not going to end well at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well when you watch that trailer. I've seen this film so many times now, Pascal. It's one of my favourite films of all time. I watch it at least once a year. I originally went to see it at the cinema with my mother. I think I was still at university, and we just went to the cinema together to see it. And when you watch the trailer, there's actually quite a few scenes in the trailer that aren't in the film, which I actually found quite surprising. Right at the start of the trailer, there's a bit where Al Pacino is shouting down a bloke in a white suit, getting him to drop his gun. And that is actually from a deleted scene, believe it or not. Now, when they showed this film on television, they actually put those deleted scenes back in, and there's also a scene involving Pacino's ex-wife in the film, which also reappears in the TV version, but they obviously decided to edit that out of the cinematic version, perhaps just to tighten the film up and to make the pacing a bit better. But I do find it's quite interesting. There's quite a few trailers that we've seen as we've been doing these reviews, Pascal, which include deleted scenes within the trailer. I always find that quite interesting.
Yeah, it's all about the timing and the sequence of events. The trailer's cut before the movie sometimes is even finished, with a view of getting pre-sales and distributors' rights and that kind of things. So, once you've given me the segue into marketing, on reflection, this will have been, I think, a difficult movie to market, and they went ahead, which we're going to describe in a moment. But let me take you back to the 1989, the 1990, depending where you are in the world. But this movie was up against Black Rain, another wonderful movie using Cityscape. Johnny Handsome, Kickboxer with Van Damme, Eric the Viking, Still Magnolias, Best of the Best, Family Business, Driving Miss Daisy, and so it goes on. So you have competition for someone's times and wallet. It's also a movie that was released many years after a perceived failure on the part of Al Pacino and producers. I'm talking about the movie Revolution, which shows what a hard business movie making is, because this is a man that gave us, Godfather, Serpico. He gave us Dog Day Afternoon, if I'm not mistaken, Scarface, and so on. And there's a minor blip, on this CV, Revolution, and the poor guy is literally out of work for 4 years until he's given the gig for A Sea of Love.
Yeah, and it's fascinating the fact that he was almost washed up, wasn't he? He'd done a bit of stage work in the theatres in New York, but I think he thought that his career was over until this script arrived. But if you actually look at the marketing of this, the posters in particular, even though he'd been out of the scene for four odd years, you can tell that they were playing upon his gravitas, because the posters, both the international US version and the UK version, at the top, it just says Pacino. Not Al Pacino, just Pacino. And that shows you the strength of him as a personal brand. Despite the fact that he'd been absent from films for 4.5 years, he was still a strong enough draw to effectively make the marketing about him.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned a moment ago about deleted scenes, and you could argue almost the confusion between the cinema version, the TV version, then the extras on the DVDs and the Blu-rays and so on. By the way, on that very point, I think the scene with his ex-wife, it's a real shame that it was taken out, because it's a scene that is maybe a couple of minutes long, no more, where the poor guy is literally kind of breaking his heart out, saying, I've got nothing. Literally, all I've got is this job, and I'm not even sure that I'm doing it well, but I've got nothing. I live in a crappy flat. I don't see you. I don't see the kids. I don't have a career to speak of. It's really quite interesting. And in the same, I'm using the term confusion perhaps in a very harsh way, but if you think about even the posters and the artwork, there seems to be a version for the US and a version for the UK international. Because back at the times where Sea of Love was available for rental, I was working, I remember, in a video store, and the memory that I had was something very, very red, and the picture of Al Pacino and Barkin in almost a kind of through a lens, slightly distorted. But I've never seen the US poster before. It's just fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I recognise the UK poster more, but I do like the US poster better because it's got Al Pacino as the cop with his gun pulled, but then he's framed in the background by a sort of faded image of him and Ellen Barkin just about to get into that amazing sort of one of the best kisses in history, I think somebody described it as. And again, we're talking about 30 odd years ago now, and posters were so important. And the strapline, "In search of a killer, he found someone who was either the love of his life or the end of it," incredible stuff. And what I also liked about this particular marketing campaign was lobby cards. Tell me about lobby cards.
Oh, these were the days. These was the corridor of dreams. You actually walk towards whichever room you were going to, screening room you were going to, because you were either being enticed and encouraged to plan your next visit, or you were given a little glimpse into the movie as you're kind of making slow progress. Nowadays, I think they don't do that. They just have posters coming soon. But those lobby cards, I mean. Here's kind of what I do when I go into any kind of flea markets or vide-grenier, as they call them in France. I look for people selling lobby cards. I collect them, and recently I found 2 lobby cards for True Romance, which I was very, very pleased about. But this is what we did back then. We kept the printed materials. If you were good enough to, or the cinema manager, you would literally find a way to get the posters given to you once the movie has given out. But the lobby cards are a selection of stills to essentially complement, what the trailer's done, what the poster's done, what, the tagline you just read out is doing. And every single one of them that we're able to find has, of course, Al Pacino in it as a still, and of course his name appearing in big, typeface. I don't know which font it is, but it's very, very big.
Yeah, absolutely. And picking up on something that you said as well is this whole fact that Sea of Love effectively redefined the role of the macho man and the femme fatale. And there was a whole series of movies that came out during the 1990s that you can actually trace back to Sea of Love. Now, a lot of people probably haven't seen Sea of Love. It's not one of the most famous films ever. I think people like you and I who know it and have seen it and remember seeing it at the cinema, it will always be one of the best films ever. But if you haven't seen it, it's probably one that you've never heard of, which is a bit bizarre. But Basic Instinct, that film with Sharon Stone and Michael Douglas, very similar sort of feel. It's a cop going up against a very sexually liberated woman. That you can trace that right back to Sea of Love. Sharon Stone's character is not dissimilar to the way Ellen Barkin played the role in Sea of Love. And you've also got Final Analysis, Sliver, The Last Seduction.
Wow. Yes.
All of those films that came out in the 1990s have a macho man, whether it's a cop or a detective or whatever, and that very sexually liberated woman who is the femme fatale, and you can trace it all the way back to Sea of Love. But also, I guess, you've got that, as we said before, that fact that they're redefining the macho man. So Pacino isn't your sort of chiseled superhero like Arnold Schwarzenegger. He sort of paved the way, didn't he, for people like Keanu Reeves and the sort of the normal guy, as opposed to the guy built like a brick privy.
No, absolutely. And we know who you're talking about here. I think it's fascinating because you're absolutely right. People will often, say, "Oh, it all began with Basic Instinct," this idea of the femme fatale. But that's why it was so important to talk about Sea of Love, and because you and I can reminisce about it. What I will say is, if I could quickly take you to talking about the music and the song Sea of Love, of course, because it is about what it's about. What is interesting is the French title of Sea of Love is Melody for a Murder. And I think, if you look at the words, it actually, I think, pays more homage to the music and to that song than maybe the movie. Because if you don't know the track at all, you could be forgiven to think, actually, going back to the UK international poster, you could be forgiven to think it's a romantic story.
Yeah.
Sea of Love, a red poster, a couple hugging each other. It doesn't really sell the danger, the threat, and so on and so forth. And I wonder whether, again, with hindsight, which is a wonderful thing, these were different times altogether, the marketing campaign could have lent more on the track itself and the music.
Yeah, I think you're right. I hadn't realised that about the French title, but actually the French title makes more sense, doesn't it, than the UK title. I mean, it's interesting. I went to see this film with my mother, talking about back in 1990. So when I went to see the film, I hadn't heard the track Sea of Love. Do you remember when we met? Da 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 da. You'll be my pet, whatever it was, and they do a fabulous scene in the film where Pacino and Goodman effectively sing that song out of tune, and again that bit, the charisma between the two of them there is great. Now, the original was sung by Phil Phillips and the Twilights, but there's also a version at the end of the film which was a more a more jazzy version by Tom Waits. But when I went to see this film in 1990, I'd never heard of the song. So again, it's obviously, it was back in the 60s, and people who were watching this film in the 90s who were middle-aged might have recognised the song. I didn't, because I was still quite young at the time. So people watching the film today probably have even less chance of recognising that song. So I'm actually buying into what you're saying and wondering whether, actually, in hindsight, they should have called this film, what was it? The Melody of Murder of Melody?
Murder for Melody, yeah.
Murder for Melody. Yeah, that's really, really interesting.
I mean, for me, that as I'm looking and reflecting on what I'm going to call the marketing pack, you had the posters, and
Yeah.
because of the elongated distribution timescale, from 89 to 90, I can see why they would change the artwork and design. But I'm going to go with you. I think the original US one better to
Yes.
actually convey the feeling of the thriller, the neo noir kind of atmosphere capturing. I think they didn't use New York sufficiently in the marketing effort. They
Yes.
didn't use the music and the track Sea of Love sufficiently. But what they did very well, I believe, is the trailer. If you've seen the trailer or the 30-second TV spots, as they often did, you would want to go and see the movie. And I think for the filmmakers to almost ignore the fact that there was a blip in Pacino's career with Revolution and say it's still going to be the guy to get bums and seats and to essentially make this movie a commercial success, to the point where a bit later, when it was released more internationally, they even went ahead and produced a 14-minute documentary, which is actually very, very interesting. And in a funny kind of way, the documentary does more to showcase New York and the song itself.
Yeah, and I think we also need just to mention Pacino as an actor. Now, you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, because you know more about filmmaking than I do, but Pacino, I believe, is what is termed a method actor, which means that he immerses himself into the role to such an extent that he will stay in character even on set between takes. So if the cameras aren't rolling and somebody goes up to Pacino and talks to him, he will be Frank Keller at that moment in time. He won't revert to Al Pacino. He will be Frank Keller all the time. And that documentary again says he became so immersed in the character that he just reacted to anything as that character would. Now, in the final scene of the film, him and Ellen Barkin are walking down the street in New York. Now, they did fill the street with some extras who knew what was going on, but as you would expect, New York is a massively busy city, so there's quite a lot of just normal people walking down the street as well. And there's a moment where Al Pacino bumps into a member of the public, and the member of the public bumps into him so hard that he falls back away from Ellen Barkin. But his recovery is incredible. He just basically shifts back and carries on talking as if the line was just so natural. Now, normally, they would have retaken that scene and made sure they got it right without him bumping into the local. But he recovered from it so well that it made it look so natural that they actually left, I guess, the duff take in, because it was so good that it made it look even better than had it not been there.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I've just realized, so we're talking about Sea of Love, the movie that made that transition from the 80s to the 90s, from the action hero style and the Femme Fatale. But of course, by accepting this role after a 4-year gap, a few years later, Scent of a Woman,
yeah,
and the Oscars.
Yeah, and I guess to finish that bit off, the fact that he immerses himself so much in the role, to me, is the ultimate example of what I've always said from a marketing point of view. Marketing is about having a deep, almost obsessive understanding of your customer. Pacino had a deep, almost obsessive relationship with his character, to the extent that he became that character, and that is how he managed to put in such an incredible performance.
Roger Edwards, thank you so much for your fine selection once again for film marketing. Sea of Love, 1989 or 1990, depending which territory you were into. A movie that, if you've not seen it or it's been a while, we can highly recommend you go back and look at it, and then you can come back and, of course, listen to the marketing elements again in the context of the film. And I think we've done a very good job to not give anything away as well. So you can watch it, no spoilers on this occasion.
Absolutely right. Still one of my favourite movies. Absolutely superb.
Everyone, this was episode number 82. Thank you so much for your support. And Roger, thank you so much for being a wonderful co-host. As always, please leave comments and suggestions in usual places. To the next one, go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. I was Pascal Fintoni, and he was Roger Edwards.